normally these are just AMAs without slides, but we thought we'd have some visuals at first because I love a good diagram. And I love making diagrams in Figma. It's like very like, meditative and all that. So truly, I actually love making diagrams in Figma. And so we'll kick off with just 4 slides. So don't worry, this isn't going to be like the whole time in slides. So we're talking today about how your go-to-market motion, like if you're self-serve or bottom-up or product-led growth, how that impacts your marketing strategy. But the first thing to know is that a lot of times what I see when people go to new companies or join companies that already have an existing marketing team is they try to take their strategy from a previous company, or they try to take the strategy and channel selection and plans and tactics from something that they read on the internet, which doesn't usually work because your strategy needs to be driven primarily by these 3 things. And this combination of 3 things is never the same. So those 3 things are things that I would put into sort of the product marketing research bucket, which is who's your audience and understanding them deeply. What market are you playing in? Who are the competitors there? What is your product? What problem does it solve? And all of these things dramatically impact your marketing strategy. Your go-to-market motion, which we're going to dive into, definitely impacts your marketing strategy. If you are a top-down sales business where the sales team is the only one selling the product, that's going to be very different than if you have people purchasing, from your website and upgrading through your product, and even a combination of these things. This is all going to dramatically change your strategy. The last thing is a category that I call marketing advantages, and these are built-in dynamics in your business, things like network effects or the ability to create a category, or if you're going after a small vertical first as a wedge in and expanding from there. This is what a newsletter that I published yesterday, newsletter.mkt1.co. Always got to be promoting and marketing, but I covered what this is. So these 3 things are going to dramatically shape your strategy. So you can't just plug and play someone else's strategy. And this is why these things are different. So today we're going to focus on talking about how your go-to-market motion specifically influences your marketing strategy. And by strategy, I just mean all the things that you do, your plans, your channels, your tactics, your experiments, etc. So I've put 3 different go-to-market motions here. One is just pure product-led growth. You don't have a sales team. Everyone buys through the website and through the product. The other side of the spectrum here is sales-led, which is just everyone has to buy through sales. And in the middle is the broad category of hybrid or product-led sales. And this is some combination. Some people can, buy through the product, or you take signal based on activity in the product to figure out who you're selling to, or you have some sort of free trial you can get through the website. So lots of things kind of fall in the middle. But based on these things, your marketing team and how you operate is going to look really different. So if you've come from, say, a top-down sales company with a product with a huge price point, and now you're at a company that is, has a much higher volume of sales, much lower cost product. Think when I was at Asana, things like that, Notion, et cetera, and startups in that sort of camp. Your whole marketing strategy is going to be different. And here's sort of how. So when you're at a product-led growth company or a hybrid company, you might have both a free and paid version. So you're both promoting a free version and sometimes a paid version too, whereas sales only, you're just going to have a paid version, typically. Your website CTA is going to be different. If you're allowing people to just jump in the product, you should set that up and set expectations and say, sign up. If you are requesting a demo, you should set expectations and say, request demo. Don't say sign up if people aren't going to get to sign up. Pet peeve of mine. This is not signing up. I have to talk to 7 people first. And then the channels that you use are going to be maybe not very different, but pretty different. When you are in a sales-led organization, you typically know the companies you're going after. And so I hate this phrase, but I can't think of a better one. If someone has one, tell me. A lot of cases with sales-led organizations, you're kind of shooting fish in a barrel. You're going after very specific people. I'm a vegetarian, so I definitely don't I don't want to shoot any fish in the barrel, but I can't think of another one. On the product-led growth side, you're having people come inbound and you're casting a much wider net. And so it's just different what you do. And in the middle, you're kind of doing a mix of things. So what you might be realizing is, wow, if I'm in a product-led sales motion, I have to do all of the things. And it's kind of true, but you actually have to just prioritize ruthlessly and pick the things that you're going to do. But you have a much broader set of like inputs and set of things you can do because you have these different motions. So it is more complex. And I think marketing teams are experiencing this as more and more companies are moving to this middle category. They're like, whoa, now I have to support a sales team. I have to support in-product growth. I have to support all of these things. How do I prioritize them? And it's true, it's a larger prioritization set, but you also, the bonus of it is you have more to work with because not everyone's going to want to buy through a sales team and not everyone's going to want to buy through the product. And so there's more options sort of at the end of the funnel. So I think in the end, it kind of evens out in easiness. Not that any of this is easy, but also on the KPI side, if you're in a product-led growth organization, you are going to be looking at behavior in the product and on the website, potentially more so than you would look at in a top-down sales organization where you're really thinking about what's your pipeline. And I think it's much more fun in a product-led organization to actually get to look at all of these full funnel metrics and look at product engagement and look at what's happening on the website. It's a little more real to me than just like marketing qualified leads in pipeline. And then lastly, just like your lead scoring is going to be really different. So you're typically scoring leads to qualify them. In a top-down sales organization, pretty much all you have to go on is the marketing behavior, interactions with website, email, et cetera, and firmographics and demographics, just sort of like what type of company is this? What role is the person in? When you are, and this is what POCUS is built for, but when you are using product signals or in a product-led growth or hybrid organization, you can also use the product and product engagement to drive lead scoring. And it is usually a much better predictor than anything else of if people are going to buy. So you have that on your side as well. And then just on the sales side, some little things like, you know, some companies have like the wrong business model. And so it's good to know how to assess if that's the case or how to push them in another direction. And so if you have a really, really high cost product, you're typically going to do that top down sales. If you have a lower cost product, it actually makes a lot of sense to kind of have a free version and try to get people in on their own because it just can't spend that much to acquire customers. And I will say that while sometimes in some organizations, like if you have a product-led motion, you can have a much faster time to close because people can just buy instantly. That's not always the case. Sometimes in product-led motions, it does take a long time to convert someone to free to paid or to get them in there and get the whole team on board, but it varies. Okay, last one so we can actually get to questions. Well, two more, I lied, but they're both about org charts. So also your business model affects your org chart. So if you've come from somewhere else and you're joining a company with a new business model, or you're building a team at a company with a different business model, your team's going to look different. You're still going to have the same basic buckets in marketing of growth marketing or demand gen. I actually recently wrote a post on this too. I think demand gen is part of growth marketing. So I'm using this as like the superset term, growth marketing. But you're still going to have growth marketing, product marketing, and then brand content, corporate marketing teams at both organizations, but they're going to look a little different. So here are the roles that I think it impacts the most. Or your business model impacts the most. So on sort of the acquisition side, whether that's called a growth marketing manager or it's called an acquisition marketer or it's called demand gen person, we already sort of talked about this. The difference is going to be the focus on inbound versus outbound. But then with lifecycle marketing, which are people that own everything typically past the qualified lead and nurturing people to either a sale or an upgrade, the difference there is that in product-led growth organization, you're going to be working a lot more with product and with email to do that because that nurturing takes place in the product. And in a sales-led organization, you're going to be working to enable sales and CS who are doing that via personal relationships and hybrids in the middle. So that role is incredibly different. If that role isn't treated differently, you're probably not doing lifecycle marketing right. So very different role. One's working closely with product. One is enabling sales and CS. Product marketing, also quite different. Product marketing always involves position or should always involve positioning and messaging and audience research, competitive research. But sales-driven organization, you're going to be working, again, a lot closer with sales and customer success. That's the CS acronym. And enabling them versus at a self-serve or hybrid organization, you're going to be spending a lot more time optimizing the website for conversion and working with the team that does that and writing, positioning, and messaging and helping create content that's really going to drive that self-serve motion. So one is really an enablement job, and one is really like a driver's seat, positioning, messaging, figuring out what you're doing, talking to, and accelerating conversion. Content marketing is different too, just because the channels are different. When you're sort of making demand gen content, when you're doing a lot of inbound work, you're making things that are really going to drive organic search traffic and be very shareable on social versus just sending like outbound emails with this content or hosting webinars with the content, which tends to be what's going on the top-down sales organization. Lastly, as a head of marketing, the role's pretty different. I've done both or all three. Yes, I've done all three. But I found that in a self-serve or hybrid organization, it's much more expected that you're setting a full funnel strategy, and marketing is working to drive conversion and growth throughout the full funnel, which is awesome. Like that's what it should be. Like you're building the brand and driving customer experience and like thinking about growth throughout the full funnel. Whereas in a top-down sales organization, marketing is thought of very much more as that service organization to sales and just like handing things to sales. So while you should work sort of full funnel as well, it's just much more focused on top of funnel strategy. And so I think that's another key difference if you're leading the team. So it's just sort of a lay of the land on how these business models impact everything that's going on in marketing. And if you take away one thing from all these slides, besides, wow, she really likes making diagrams in Figma, it would be that you cannot plug and play your strategy from another company, even if you have the same business model, and especially if you don't. And the other thing to say is that if you are switching jobs or hiring someone, it's really helpful to get someone that has business model experience. Marketing is dramatically different. And so I find, not for every role, but especially for heads of marketing or especially for a senior leader on your team, it's going to be helpful if they have some business model experience at some point. Or if they don't, they at least understand the pretty dramatic differences. Yeah, I'll stop there and open it up to questions.
That was awesome, Emily. I, like you, love a good Figma framework and diagram. So my brain works in that way. I love how you laid that out. My question is, and you kind of touched on this, like it's so hard to make the switch from one business model to another. You have to think about kind of all the impacts. So when your founder comes to you as a marketer and says, hey, I want to try freemium, or the opposite, when your PLG and your founder comes to you and says, hey, we should hire a sales team, how do you handle that? And kind of like, where would you start if you were in that position today?
Yeah. No matter the situation, like as a marketer, that's pretty overwhelming. So typically like, I'd be like, well, let's talk about why. Like what about, like, even if you don't have a lot of influence over the why or the decision, it's still helpful to like understand where it came from. Because sometimes it's deeply thought through and sometimes it's just like, well, everybody has a hybrid motion these days. So it's helpful to understand sort of where this is coming from. Like, is this coming from the fact that some people are closing within a 1 to 2 day window and people are clearly very ready to buy? That was sort of the case when I was at Carta. Like it was so clear, this was the leading solution for cap tables. People were coming and closing within 24 hours. It was like, we have to have self-serve in some capacity. People were demanding it. And so if that's the case, that's awesome. If it's more like you're trying to just kind of do this because it seems like the thing to do, you're going to want to dive a little deeper, and you're going to want to suggest sort of like baby step ways to get to this new motion. And actually, no matter what the scenario is, you don't want to just jump into it. So there are a few ways. So I think, of course, you're going to want to lay out, here's everything that needs to change. And it's literally everything in marketing. Like eventually you're going to be doing a different set of things. Your email programs are going to be different. The channels you use again are going to be different. All of your website is going to need to change. So I think it is helpful to, much like how you would put together a launch plan for a product launch, to just sort of, I would use Asana. You can use whatever you want, but it should probably be Asana. It's the best for marketing. But I would lay out like a full plan, and I would go sort of channel by channel or function by function within marketing and say, like, here are the things we eventually need to do. Not to overwhelm you, but to have a lay of the land, and then kind of prioritize based on what's necessary to get this off the ground and what isn't. But let me break this down a little bit more. I mentioned the baby steps. Like, what are the baby steps when you want to put in a free motion when you have top-down sales? Something that I don't think people often think about is you don't actually need to have the full self-serve flow built out. You don't need to have self-serve onboarding figured out in the product necessarily. You don't need to have a self-serve flow necessarily figured out on your website. You can actually implement a version to kind of test this just through like chat on the website. So you can put in a chat tool and actually have something that's like ready to buy or a button, and people can go to chat and you can talk them through it right there in the chat and do a purchase. We kind of played around with that at Carta. You can also test sort of an I'm ready to buy button and then have that go to a different sales process or like a sales meeting that happens right then if they're, if it's during business hours, or just a fast track sales process where the sales conversation is different because they're literally ready to buy. And in that situation, sometimes they're not actually ready to buy, but it's more of an order taking situation than a sell situation. So you can have different sales flows. So it's like, what can we do incrementally to make sure this is going to work and not just completely launch all of these new flows at once? So I think it can be helpful to kind of do some of these intermediate things. Because if you are launching a free motion, it's like, or a self-serve motion or both, they're not always hand in hand. You're going to need to change the website flows, change the onboarding flows in product, and do all of these things. And so I think those like baby step methods work quite well. And I don't think people think of like the chat version or the like different sales routing version. If someone wants to put in a sales-led motion, the main thing you have to do there is in both cases, you have to do a lot of work with routing like in your marketing automation tool. So whether that's Marketo, HubSpot, or something new, you need to make sure there are clear rules for when people go to sales and when people stay in sort of a marketing and product nurture flow. And that's always going to be the case if you have a hybrid model, but especially when you're introducing it, I don't think people realize the amount of marketing ops work or rev ops work to get this right, because you don't want to have it kind of be up to the potential customer to know where to go. Like, you have to think about who goes to sales, who stays in products and gets nurtured, and how do we make sure it's the right people? And then how do we enable like easy crossover if we get it wrong? So you now have two pathways. You want to get people on the right path, and also make it easy to get back to the other path. I don't know if that makes sense, but you could say, okay, well, if they're over this size company, we're going to send them to sales, but then they actually just want like the lower plan for one team in their company. How do you then get them back to the self-serve flow? So that's a huge piece of it. So let me back up here. You make your full plan, like lay out, here's what we need to change. Think about ways you can baby step into that overall change with the founder in the situation. And then lastly, you should have a funnel diagram of how your funnel works, especially in this situation, and update your funnel diagram to have these two paths and make it super clear what's going to happen. And then this needs to be built out on the ops side. It's a lot of work. I think founders think, oh, we're going to launch a free version. And you can, or a self-serve version. I keep conflating them, but like, we're going to launch a self-serve version. It's a big process. So break it down, small steps.
It is super complicated, especially in the hybrid motion where you're trying to figure out like which funnel and creating the rules of engagement and routing. Who owns that?
Great question. If there's one marketer, like it's probably you. If there's multiple marketers, like there's definitely been situations where it's like, the same person that's doing the product marketing also has figured this out. But no, so on the marketing ops or the rev ops side in general, rev ops just including sales ops and marketing ops and maybe customer success operations as well. So typically the rev ops team, whether that's a centralized team or you have marketing ops under marketing, seen it both ways, where marketing ops sits under rev ops or marketing ops sits in marketing. I don't know what these hand motions tell you, but they're really doing the executing, but you as a marketing team and whoever's figuring out this self-serve motion need to kind of guide the bigger decision. So the big questions of like, who goes where, when, who goes to sales, who goes to product, that needs to be figured out usually by the marketing team or the marketing lead or the growth marketing lead whoever that might be, and then sort of work with marketing ops to figure out exactly how you're going to implement that in a marketing automation tool plus a CRM. So it's kind of a combination, but I think often the mistake I see is like, a marketing lead or someone who's more in a marketing sort of strategy role will go to marketing ops and say, okay, we're launching self-serve, build it out. Well, that's not going to be enough because there's a lot of questions around segmentation that are kind of at that higher level. The other thing I'll say is that marketing ops is actually, and sales ops is actually something that can often be outsourced to a specialist, and it actually can be an advantage because these external contractors or agencies have done this so many times before that they've seen a lot of patterns and other mistakes. So I actually often like when you're doing a big project on the ops side to augment, even if you have an in-house team, augment with an agency or contractor who's done this a lot of times to help with the additional work and bring that sort of specialization and expertise.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I've been monopolizing. So
yeah, sorry. I was like, oh, we don't have a lot of time for questions. I could talk about this for like 7 hours. So, it's, I won't, but
Alina, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Emily. So I have a question for you. I'm at a hybrid go-to-market motion Series B pre-product market fit startup. And over the next 6 months, leadership will probably look to hire a VP of sales and marketing. And I'm curious what you think about hiring for one role and if you can talk about some of the pros and cons there. So yeah, just would love to hear your thoughts.
So you're a hybrid motion.
Yes.
Okay. The challenge that I often see when people hire a VP of revenue, a VP of sales and marketing that includes both things is that what tends to happen is they hire a sales leader that then leads marketing. Rarely do I see it the other way, that a marketing leader is then hired to also lead sales. Sometimes, but rarely. And the challenge with a hybrid model is that marketing is involved, whether the product is doing the selling or the sales team is doing the selling, because that's really the difference between these two models. The product itself is doing the selling, not the product. The product itself is doing the selling, or the sales team, the humans, are doing the selling. And so marketing is involved no matter what the situation. They're involved. Sales is not very involved if the product is doing the selling. And so if you hire a sales leader in a hybrid motion to lead sales and marketing, they don't understand, but they don't have experience with a huge piece of this puzzle in a hybrid motion. Like they don't have experience doing marketing work that helps the product do the selling. So it's like they only have experience with a piece of the puzzle. And so that's a challenge, especially with a hybrid motion. It's going to be a challenge no matter what when a sales leader is leading marketing. But it's going to be especially a challenge in a hybrid motion because sales just isn't involved in every sale. That makes sense. And then I think also the other challenge I see just in general in these situations is I wrote a newsletter on that, but it's true. I did. I wrote a newsletter on like the differences between sales and marketing because there are tons. And I actually think that marketing teams operate a little bit more like product teams generally than like sales teams. So this is a challenge that a leader that leads both has to wrap their head around. Sales is very focused on quarterly goals and quarterly quotas and sort of short-term revenue, whereas marketing needs to be thinking about this quarter, but also needs to be thinking about setting things up for success in future quarters. So there's like the short-term versus short-term and long-term focus. There's also the focus on just driving growth top of funnel versus thinking about sort of the overall brand, the overall experience, enabling every team to do a better, to have sort of that better experience with customers. So there's just a lot of differences between how sales and marketing operate and what their goals are too. Mm-hmm. So wrote a whole thing on that, but the point is that it's tough to hire someone that can own both, but it's possible. But I think in a hybrid motion, like you really want to make sure they've had some exposure to marketing in a hybrid motion and steer whoever is making this hire decision in that direction. The business model experience here is going to be critical.
So what would you do instead? If you could given that like hiring is limited, preserving runway, those types of considerations. Yeah. How would you approach
in a hybrid model? You have one leader. I would hire a head of marketing who's led an SDR team before as well. I mean, I would hire them to lead, you could hire them to lead sales and marketing, but like I would hire a marketer who's also managed SDRs. So they have that sales exposure. And they also have that exposure to how to, help drive a PLG motion. I'm also biased. I am a marketer, but honestly, I think that's going to give you more coverage on this set of experience. Marketing leader who's also led an SDR team. So has that exposure to how quotas and commission and all that stuff works too. Biased opinion, but I think, but trying not to be biased about it. I think they'll have more exposure to the general strategy that needs to be in place. So
cool. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. We have another question. Anar, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yes. Hi, Emily. Thanks so much for taking the time. Hey, I run a direct-to-consumer company focused on longevity. And off topic, actually, the next big area is going to be longevity for dogs, which I think a lot more people care about than longevity for humans, actually.
Yeah.
And I've read a lot of your notes, so I think they're very helpful. We need to hire a product marketing guy. And I think you define that person more as a audience marketing. So what is the right title, right? Can we go out there and say we need audience marketing person, or no one will know what we're talking about? And also for the things that you describe, right? Person who needs to understand the product and it needs to understand the audience and the ways to connect with the audience and also help with the strategy, but also be a doer. Is that like a unicorn? Does it need like 10 years of experience? Like how realistic is to find that person?
Yeah. Let me take this in sort of two parts. I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say that product marketing is more audience marketing. It's kind of, I think product marketing is a misnomer. So I'll explain that concept and then I'll explain sort of how to find this magical, mysterious product marketer that can do all these things. So product marketing, we have the worst names for marketing roles. It's not, everybody's marketing the product. So it's kind of a weird name. And also growth marketing is bad too, because like everyone should be driving growth. But besides the point, product marketers really need to be an expert in who the audience is before they need to be an expert in what the product is. So most of marketing starts from deeply understanding the audience and how the product then solves the needs of that audience. So it kind of starts from deeply understanding the audience and deeply understanding the market to put the product in context. So the best product marketers know that their job starts with deeply understanding the audience and market and then deeply understanding the product. And so nobody calls it that, but like that's what it is. So it's like, it's more accurate to say that the person that's doing product marketing is the owner of the audience knowledge and the market knowledge and the product knowledge for the team. So they're really, a product marketer is really like largely responsible for a lot of the foundational work that drives the marketing team. They also tend to be responsible for positioning, messaging, copywriting early on. And they also tend to be responsible for product launches and sometimes helping create content and steer the ship. But really they're like this glue for the marketing team because they deeply understand this foundation. And so how do you find that person? What does a great product marketer look like? They exist. I think of product marketers or audience marketers. Don't call it that externally, but think about their responsibilities that way. I mean, I would love it if the whole world switched to it, but like, I'm not that powerful. So the goal here is like product marketers are like mini marketing leaders. They're really strategic. They know how to balance what I call the fuel in the engine. This would take a while to talk about, but basically I think of marketing in two parts. You have fuel, all the content, messaging, design that you create, and your engine, how you're distributing things, what you're doing on the growth side to get it out in the world. And the product marketer is in the middle. So you're looking for someone that kind of understands how it all fits together. And so product marketers tend to be, they're sort of marketing strategists. They kind of use both they're both right and left brained. They, really think about things from this sort of foundational, like first principles level. And they tend to be really good project managers. I don't mean to minimize in any way, like the set of skills, but they tend to be really good at like working cross-functionally and putting pieces together and managing across the team. So you're looking for people that kind of tend towards that skill set. And they also really need to be able to write. That's a crucial part. So looking for someone that's that researcher, writer, mix of right and left brain, very organized, like future marketing leader sometimes this person has 3 to 5 years of experience. Sometimes they have 10. I don't think that matters as much. It's this skill set. And it is possible to find. It's just, it's definitely really hard to hire great product marketers. I think it's harder than hiring for other things where it's sort of easier to test. You have this skill set, you have this knowledge in a growth channel, can you create really great content? It's harder because it's more comprehensive. It's also an amazing role for people to get into if you want to eventually lead a marketing team. If you want to lead a marketing team, get yourself into a product marketing role. There's other paths to leading marketing, but that's the clearest one that I see. I don't know that I was trying to be more universal with the answer to the question. So I hope that's helpful. That's the skill set.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So generally for the best chance of success, you would just call it product marketing, whatever, manager, director, but that's how you would start.
Yeah, I would start that way. Or like if it's your first marketer or your head of marketing, call it that too, but you can emphasize the product marketing skill set. But when you're listing out the skill sets that you want them to be an expert in doing audience research and doing the segmentation and doing the market research as well.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks so much, Emily.
Yeah, no
problem. Do we have more questions from the community? Otherwise, I have a ton, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
I've silenced a room of, I don't know if that's good or bad, but they
just love hearing from you. Okay. Well, so I have a question. Given the current economic climate, things are wacky right now. Is it a good idea? One, is it a good idea to go hybrid because you're introducing some level of complexity, or is it good because you're kind of, now hedging your bets a little bit? And then if you are thinking about kind of marketing leaders and the growth levers that they have to pull right now, which ones would you be investing in at this moment? And which ones do you feel like maybe, punt those down the line when things pick back up?
That is it's a massive question, Sandy. That's like a whole other talk. No, it's not. It's related. But I think the same principles that I would use to figure out if a hybrid motion makes sense in good economic times, I would use now, except obviously you have more constraints on sort of the number of people that you're hiring and stuff like that. If your audience or your prospects or customers are seeking out a way to get the product without talking to someone and they're just ready to go and they understand the solution. A lot of this comes down to do they understand the problem and solution pretty well to the point where they're just ready to pull the trigger or get into a product? If that's the case, then you probably need that motion, and you ultimately can be a lot more efficient than selling with a sales team. So if you have a huge sales team and a bunch of SDRs and things like that, and really nobody wants that, and they just want to be able to you can actually introduce a ton of efficiency. And so I think that's always the case, but probably especially now, if you're basically have all of these people doing the work that your website and your product can do with some people powering the behind the scenes piece, then you should definitely move into that model. There's obviously other considerations on runway and time, but generally speaking, it's the same set of principles. Is this how my audience wants to purchase and get into the product? And do they want both options? Do they want one option? What is that? You have to start from there. What's going to be best for this audience and how people buy? And you can look for trends and how they're buying now to figure that out. And so that stays the same. In terms of the channel question, I think that you obviously have to control spend a lot more. So I think a lot of times during really good times, people just spend their way into getting the results that they want. And I think you have to go back and say, what are the sort of more organic levers that we're going to use, whether that's email or whether that's SEO or having a really strong content strategy and finding your niche in content that you're putting out there through all of these channels. You have to kind of stop the heavy reliance on paid. Of course, you're still going to have, I think you should always have some level of paid search spend going on for key things where you just don't want to miss out to competitors on these things. So there's always a low level of paid that you need, but you have to really you have to build a content strategy. And I don't mean content doesn't just mean blog posts. Content means talks, webinars, community, all of these things. what is the value you're adding to your audience and how are you getting it to them? Like that's, again, always the case, but especially now to deeply think about how can we add value in sort of an organic way to this audience that doesn't rely heavily on paid, because it's adding so much value that like the people will come. And so again, always the case in marketing, but I think, bad economic times force you to do things the right way, or the way you should have always been doing them. And so that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, well, what's the, way to do this? Obviously you got to move fast in these ways, but that's how I would think about it. And then layer on more paid later, because then sometimes it does make sense to pay your way to growth. That's like the nature of venture-backed businesses, is like you're spending money now to kind of land grab and gain market share and then, go from there. But in times like this, you're gonna have to pull back on that spend. So
yeah, totally agree. It can be tough though, figuring out where to make those calls and how to do the prioritization, especially if you are in a hybrid motion. Like, you just got so many competing priorities. But I like the, first principles approach, think about your audience.
Let me say one more thing on that. Conversion is a forgotten lever. That's so buzzwordy. But let me say what I actually mean. People are so focused on driving people to the top of the funnel or driving a raw number of qualified leads that they forget that like what happens between those stages is so critical. And the conversion rate between stages is massively important. And the conversion rate on your website is massively important. And a lot of times that work, it takes time, but it doesn't involve spending more money besides on humans, which is really just like improve the messaging, improve the smoothness of the process, improve the flows. And oftentimes the reason people don't focus on this is because their measurement's bad and they don't actually know the conversion rates from different stages in the funnel from different sources. And so get a handle on your conversion rates. Like you can do the math on this, and fixing conversion rates at top of the funnel. Like you can have the same number of people come in the door and have a lot more people end up at the, end of the process there just by improving conversion. So, don't forget about conversion as a lever ever, but especially in these times, like really that is going to solve your problems no matter what your motion is. And again, when you have a hybrid motion, you kind of have two paths and you're going to think about conversion on both paths. And you can actually like, if you like doing math and modeling, nerd, but like, if you do like to do that, you can actually look and say, if I increase conversion rate here, what's going to happen down funnel? And you can find your most leveraged places to increase conversion. So conversion is your friend, improve it. Or it's your enemy and your friend, but like it's a real, like just really think more about how can I be improving conversion rates during times like this.
I love that. And if there isn't a newsletter already on that, I think you should write it.
There isn't really, it's like, it's core behind them, but yeah, there should be. I got a backlog. I need to hire some writers. I can't churn these things out fast enough. That's why I just do talks now, but this is where you get the newsletter ideas before they become newsletters.
Yeah. I know we're at time. Thank you so much, Emily. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for sharing those awesome slides. I'm sure everyone on this call probably wants access, so we'll send it out after we wrap up here. And then look out for a newsletter on this topic that we discussed.
Yes. Yeah. Sandy and I are sort of working on a longer newsletter sort of on this topic and on those slides. And so expect that when, I get my stuff together to make it happen. Yeah, exactly. It'll be soon.